Good evening. I am Jonathan Albin, and this is NycosRPG, and we are today looking at the Game Master's Toolbox. One of the biggest challenges to doing videos like this is I'm not sure who's listening and who's observing and who isn't, and that's perfectly fine because I'm intending it to be for everybody. But just to give you a little bit of background about who I am, I'm Jonathan Alvin, a game master with almost 50 years of experience behind the shield, running role-play games in every possible genre. And tonight we're going to be talking about the concept of character building. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm alien or foreign to role-playing, but I also don't want you to think that I'm considering myself to be the end-all be-all. So my discussion tonight is going to be about what I believe to be the elements of character building, and believe me, they aren't going to be what you think. Now, we are referring to, of course, the NycosRPG system and the NycosRPG game world system under the world title of Nykos. So I just want to show you that there is a game world behind all of this, but let's get past that and whoops, just keep pushing buttons, John. Eventually you'll figure out which one it is. There we go. So today we're going to be talking about the basic characteristics that generate a persona, a character, no matter what game system you're playing in. And I'm going to be speaking of these terms, but not in the way you might think. So as we go over them, if you see places where what I'm talking about matches what you're familiar with, feel free to leave a comment in the comments, the chat box here, and I'll be glad to respond to them during this show. Now, pardon me. In every episode of Game Master's Toolbox, I try to provide information coming from the standpoint of all of my years of experience. It's not intended to castigate or alienate anybody who's not familiar. And so, again, I'm looking forward to any kind of conversation with you. So I'm looking for your responses as well. I'll be glad to create videos on any particular subject you'd like to talk to as well. But let's get started, shall we? So let's get rid of the map, first of all. I thought I already did. Hit the wrong button. Alrighty. So today we're going to be talking about characteristics of a character sheet and the things that these numbers mean, and also how they refer to the character in action, as you will see as we get to the later points. We're going to be talking about the really basics here, and when I do so, I'm not going to be defining them per se. If you are a role player, you're familiar with what these terms mean, but I will be perhaps putting them in a new perspective. So the first one we're going to talk about here is statistics. Now, most roleplay games require you to, almost from the very beginning, generate a series of numbers that are defined as the character's statistics, also known as the stat block for the character in the story. And these are familiar, even if you've never played a tabletop roleplay game, you'd be familiar with these from the standpoint of video games as well. Many times they have these statistics, and generally speaking, they are referring to the physical characteristics of the persona, the character. And they're usually generated in a number range to represent a high or a low for each persona. And the choices that you make about character development come from them. I question this, however, because I feel that statistics aren't necessarily a structural necessity in those terms. I'll come back to that in a minute, but the idea here is that the statistics historically, for every other thing that we deal with, are almost always things that are taken after the fact. So, for example, in baseball, they have the the hits, runs, errors, batting averages. These are all statistics, and they do define a persona in long term by talking about them in the past tense. So they say what your batting average was, your strength, your core abilities are in the past tense. And this is kind of a problem because in role-play games, you want these numbers to be something that define you and give you a structure. So in this case, to which I'm referring here are actually considered to be, in game mechanics purposes, your statistics are the skeleton. the core basis of your persona, the things that bring you into the game and define you for relative positioning in cases of how smart you are, how strong you are, how wise you are, how resilient you are, and so on. And these statistics are essential to the game, and they are a structural necessity. But most games, and I would argue to say that the majority of role-playing games, do not see these as a skeleton, but rather as a starting point. And as the persona advances, as the character advances, these numbers tend to accelerate higher and higher, or if the game mechanic requires it, lower and lower, depending on how you are looking at them. But the idea of a constant as a defining boundary of who that persona is, they don't necessarily look at it that way. But to me, the statistics should be that which can be depended upon week after week, year after year for that persona, and that's just not the case in many of the games that are out there today. So when I speak of character building, you have to have a baseline. You have to define who that persona is in some form. And as you will see in many of the role-play games that are out there, this simply isn't the case. In some games, you can change your specific originally pre-rolled or originally rolled numbers can advance with experience. As you gain points in the system, you can move up within the game. And I don't perceive that as being really a defining statistic for the persona. Instead, I see that as an advancement course, and we'll talk about advancement here in a few. But the idea here is that when you're looking at it from a standpoint of true character building, you have to know what you're starting with, what you are beginning as, and the essence of who you are really doesn't change over much over your life. There might be extenuating circumstances. There might be, miracles and wonders and such. But generally speaking, your core, your central point should be a statistic. It should be static. It shouldn't be changing. And so therefore, when we speak of statistics, we don't necessarily want to see it as something that's a necessity for the game, but instead as a sign of advancement and such. And we'll get back to that in a minute. Now, oops, did it again. Let's go here and here. So now we're going to talk a little bit about many role-play games. And this is not all. There are certainly some role-play games that don't have anything to do with this. And I'm utilizing this word with a narrow band of species. The concept of race in a role-play game, species in a role-play game, really has to do with the defining characteristics and the, if you will, the traits of a species. Now, are these external limitations? In definition, they are. Whatever you are has a certain list of traits that are involved that are hard and fast. They don't change. But to my way of thinking, if you are from a certain species background, there are defining traits that you can improve upon because you are moving, advancing, becoming more. And this deviation from the norm, this idea of having your traits advance, is kind of a limiting thing. For example, if you consider you only have, these flat abilities and they never improve because of who you are, it's misunderstanding the very concept of personal advancement. So I can be a better human being. I can always be better at the things that are human: compassion, awareness, acceptance. The very essence of many of our worldly conflicts come from trying to define these to be limitations, and I don't see that. Instead, I see humanity as something that we can become better at, we can become more of, and therefore our character building, our advancement of us as a person, can improve along these lines as well, as you would see if you looked at the mechanics of NycosRPG. But generally speaking, in role-play games, race becomes an external limiting factor, and that I feel is perhaps a bit misplaced. Again, I'll apologize for my speech pattern. I have a condition called Bell's palsy that makes me not be able to move certain muscles in my face properly, so I'm going to apologize for that because I might be coming out muffled, and I hope not. The next of these is class, and I have to tell you that if you're coming from a non-role-play environment, that word will possibly be jarring to you, because in our world, when we consider class, we're looking almost purely at economic status, where we are on the climbing ladder of economics. And in role-play games, that's not the case. In most role-play games that have classes, they depend on those classes to limit your advancement, to limit your decision-making possibilities as a person in the world. And I find these to be not only tedious, but actually kind of irrelevant, because that's not the way humanity works. If I decide I want to become an air traffic controller and I study all the things to become an air traffic controller, that's going to certainly raise me in an echelon, but that does not change necessarily my class. And I'm still whoever I am, regardless of my occupation, right? So when you talk about using class to say, well, you must limit your choice of skills based on your background and on your persona, if you're doing it within the limitations of class, you're restricting yourself beyond what is even really probable or possible. If, for example, I were in a place in our culture where I didn't yet know how to read, I could learn to read, and that reading would change my personal advancement, and it would also theoretically change my economic class. So it simply doesn't work in our world to limit like it does. Furthermore, we don't go into the world like this any longer. Perhaps back in an earlier time where there were guild affiliations and there were established tutorial processes where you had to become say for example, a cobbler for a period of years before you could learn other skills within that narrow band, then perhaps it would be useful to qualify them or use the term class. But in this case, it's actually it should not be a limit. Instead, class should be, again, from a character building standpoint, we should attempt to become more classy. We should be more, maybe it's not even proper to say that, because social strata advancement can happen in any niche or any category. And so therefore, the idea of limiting someone to what they can or can't learn based on class is really not only counterintuitive, it's also counter reality. And of course, that's always something that's kind of important to me. If we're not advancing as individuals, regardless of wherever we are in life, we're kind of missing the opportunities that we have in front of us. And so I don't see class as something that should be maintained as a limit for decision making. As a matter of fact, in the NycosRPG system, there aren't any classes. There are career paths, there are means by which you can gain certain skills, and they can be affiliated with organizational limits, but they're not mandated as such. Fourth, we're going to talk a little bit about skills. And in our world, what we know is how we are defined. If someone says that guy knows carpentry, or that person knows gymnastics, or that person knows biblical theology, or whatever, these lists of skills are never limiting. As a matter of fact, you can learn, like for example, you could learn basket weaving, or you could learn how to ride a bicycle. And all of these are skills, but they're not essential. In many role-play games, you can't take on certain abilities or whatever unless you have certain stackable skills and you haven't advanced up that chain, which has, again, a lot more to do with advancement than it does with the reality. But even in our senior years, we can pick up new skills and new abilities. I mean, I've only been doing videos for about 2 years, which probably says something poor about how fast I've advanced because there's so much more I could learn. But even so, the limited skills with which I'm operating are skills that I've captured and I'm learning and I'm building. And in such a fashion, they shouldn't be any kind of there shouldn't be some sort of checklist that says you must do this, you must do this, you must do this in order to be who you are. Now, of course, to do certain jobs, I mean, obviously, to become a medical doctor, you have to have finished university, and you must have finished your internship, and you must have done all your residency and all of those things to get to that perfection level. But those are very specialized, and again, those aren't limiting, because while you're doing that, you could also be becoming a really good racquetball player or whatever. So the skills shouldn't be directly associated with your advancement unless, of course, you choose to advance it. Now, wow, got beepers going off. You're crazy. All right, then let's go on to the next one here. And this is the big one. Advancement. Should it be a measure of worth, or should it be a reward? Now, in role-play games as a group, generally speaking, most of them use some form of experience points awards or time in trade awards or whatever, and they still show the advancement as something that is rewarded to the player for their actions in game. And I feel this is absolutely opposite. We should gain advancement by practice. That which we do, that which we act upon, is what causes us to advance. In other words, going to a university for 4 years in the American culture generates usually a diploma of some sort, whether you're talking about high school diploma or you're talking about your sheepskin from university or your affiliation as a pilot or whatever. These all are things that are earned, and they're earned by the action. So instead of making the advancement a measurement by someone else who just grants it to you, it should be something that you use to increase your own value, your own expertise. And that runs down all of these lines. I can be a better human being by doing the things that a good human being would do. I'm not, of course, at this point defining them characteristically, but I am saying, for example, if I become more empathic and I'm more inclusive and more aware of my environment and what people are valuing, then I'm going to be gaining in that, but I'm not being rewarded from the outside. And yet most RPGs, especially the big popular ones, provide you advancement only as a reward for your actions. And so it's counterintuitive. You can advance in an RPG simply by doing certain things. And, for example, in the classic Dungeons and Dragons, you kill monsters, you gain experience points, you gain advancement, you gain new abilities. They don't really have anything to do with what you did in roleplay. And that, I feel, is a disservice both to the participant, who should be rewarded for their efforts, and it also undermines the values of those advancements because they become a checklist item that you just automatically receive for participating. And I know I'm probably going to get in trouble with that one, and feel free to make your comments. I'd love to hear from you. But the idea that we should award advancement only by the experience award and not taking into account the actual dynamic role play, the inclusion of those activities within the play, the very idea that your progression through the game is associated with a arbitrary set of numeric values instead of the actual effort you put into it, to me feels counterproductive or counterintuitive. The next one we go to, as I would say, next slide. So now we're talking about conflict, and this goes directly to what I was saying before. Is our purpose in the world to conflict with others? I have to think about that for myself for a while, because it sometimes feels like it, but the reality is the these two terms become reversed. The purpose of engagement is to determine whether or not we agree or whether there's a conflict. And so therefore, it's almost like the tables have been turned in role-play games, such as I've said before, the classic big name games have at their core knock down a door, kill a monster, get their loot. And these things foment the idea of conflict on first meeting. So it's really no wonder that especially newer players endeavor to take matters into a combat situation or a conflict situation, even when it might not be there. Even if you are really telling a different kind of a story and you're talking about the interaction between people, when you set conflict up as the measure of advancement, and you say, well, if you kill this many monsters, you get this much loot, you get this thing. It's the opposite. We should be finding ways to find out what the engagements are and then reward the resolution of that conflict regardless of how it comes out, because it was the engagement that mattered. I often say it this way, when you play a game, is the purpose to win? Because if the purpose of the game is to win, then once you've won, why play again? You've achieved. Congratulations, you have accomplished. No, the purpose of the game is to participate in the game, and as a side benefit, you might be rewarded with a victory. You might end up winning. Now, in role-play games, that's not the case, and there are way too many people, in my estimation, who play role-play games specifically to be the winners or the losers. They want to be engaged in the actual conflict from that standpoint. But it's really counterintuitive because we're no longer, whoa, where did my buttons go? Somehow I hit the wrong button. Yikes. Go back here. How did that happen? I don't know. We will fix this. We are all the way down on conflict. There we go. So if we are engaged and we're engaging with others, that's really the purpose of the game, if you will. And then conflict results from that. And sometimes the conflict is necessary, sometimes it's avoidable, and there should be advancement on either course. And it shouldn't be the measure for success or the purpose of the mechanic. Now, some will say that's the purpose of the game, is to be a conflict game, and that's great. If you're playing the game to be competitive and you wish conflict to be the mechanism, more power to you. But, oops, get those eventually. But to me, that's reversed again. Now, the next we have to talk about is the campaign. And I know some players think of the campaign being every session that you play over serial weeks. And while that may be the case, what I'm referring to is the concept of the campaign as the story, as the process that the storyteller, game master, is bringing the players through. And so the question becomes, is it a vehicle for facilitation, or is it the kind of the dynamic or the purpose for the game? And there are people who see it both ways. And in my case, I see the campaign not as a vehicle for facilitation, but rather as the story of the players as they progress. Now, what do I mean when I say vehicle for facilitation? Well, when you are playing a role-play game and you are using conflict, as we mentioned before, as your objective, then many people look at the campaign simply as, what's the next engagement? What's the next engagement? What's the next conflict? What's the next conflict? And that process, if that becomes your focus or your engine for playing, I call into question whether what you're actually doing is a role-play game or if you are playing some form of combat game and happen to call it a role-play game. This has been a discussion I've had for a long time, so I'm asking you as an audience, what is it you see the campaign as being? Because if it's a vehicle for facilitation, then perhaps what you're really saying is that you're actually playing for the conflicts and not for the adventure. And so I can see it both ways. And in my case, I tend to play the campaign as the story of the players as they progress instead of the objective by which they advance. And there's perhaps a difference can be discussed there. Gotta get these all blocked out. Get the right one turned on here. Finally, and this really comes down to it. If you are a role-play gamer and you are playing to win the role-playing game, that's okay. That's a choice. That's an optional choice. But as a game master, as a storyteller, if you're truly wanting to develop character building, then this may be a different engine. The idea of a character being advanced, a character that is being built, isn't what you do at the beginning and then you race through the adventures and gain victory. But instead, the character is what you build at the first, and then you advance it over your time frame. And in no case does either victory or a checklist come into it. There's no, in our real world, pardon me. In our real world, you can have as your objective to reach certain things in your life, and you'll have an internal checklist of things that go, I want to go to school, and I want to get a degree, and I want to get a job that pays well, and I want to get a wife, and I want to get children, and whatever your series of checklist points are. Those are personal and internal. They're not externalized. It's not that, well, in order for you to proceed, you must have a level of this and a level of that, and that's not the way real life works, and therefore in a role play game it's really not necessary. It's something that you may have as a individual choice, but it shouldn't be bound into who you are and what you're going to do. Furthermore, in a standard life, do we ever really get victory? I certainly look at people that have a better economic status. They have a higher class, as I would say, and that might be an objective to try to equate ourselves to that or advance to where we would be worthy of those kinds of victories. But that is not the objective. The point of the persona, purpose of the character, is to advance its life through time and see what it has done to build its character. So these are the basic issues that I have when you talk about a role-play game and whether or not the objectives of the game are being met. So now my question to you, viewers, is this. If you are playing in a role-play game and you are developing a character, is that development happening before you start? Is that the only place there's any character building done? Because arguably, if that were the case, then you'd already be at the highest class. You would have already achieved what you were trying to achieve. Your statistics would be as you could move them around. And the reality is that we don't. We have what we have as a being, and we try to improve it. We try to improve it in every possibility, but everything that we do as far as an improvement becomes a skill, and we can improve the skills fundamentally to an unlimited status. You could, become the world's strongest man if you did all the, or woman. You know me. I'm not drawing a line there, but you could become the strongest if you desired to try to do that. There would still be physical limitations. There would still be the core of who you are that would not be able to be improved over much. And so the idea of having a skeleton or a statistical core, a base, if you will, makes sense. You have who you are, and then you have those things which you want to advance to make you into what you want to become. Your status at birth, if you're in a standard role-playing game that has multiple species, multiple races, then you're going to have traits that derive from that. If you are playing in a game where there are no limitations or boundaries, you're fundamentally looking at a game with only a singular race, and so therefore the very concept is pushed to the back because we all share those. but the point is that we advance every day of our lives towards something, from something. We're constantly moving, whether we're intentionally advancing or whether actually backsliding or limiting ourselves. That's all a matter of our choices and our engagements within life. That means we need to look at what is our purpose for engagement. Are we doing it to improve ourselves, in which case that sometimes includes conflict, but doesn't necessarily. Perhaps it's in a tutorial or an educational pathway, or maybe it's social and we're connecting for more diverse reasons. But the idea of limiting it to the ways that role-play games have in the past, we actually are undoing it. So if you are looking at character building, you want to look at what the character does in its life, in its advancement, in its story progression, and make sure those things are truly building your character. I want to thank you for watching this episode. I'm Jonathan Alvin, and this has been Game Master's Toolbox. We've talked about character building today, and character building is only part of what we talk about. So make sure you watch us. I do an episode every night at 11 p.m. Pacific, and I vary it up. Sometimes I'm doing Toolbox episodes. Occasionally I do Nycos news updates, so you know what's going on within the campaigns that I'm running, and a whole variety of other things. But we're on every night, 11 p.m. Pacific. So welcome if that's what you're looking for. If you like what you're seeing so far, make sure you like and follow. If you are wanting to support us, feel free to subscribe to the channel, or in the case of YouTube, subscription, it doesn't cost you a penny, and I'd really appreciate you to become part of our community. If you make sure you click your bell, you'll be able to get notifications whenever new videos are uploaded. And also wanted to mention that if you are interested in supporting the program, want to be a part of the family, we have a Patreon account at patreon.com/Nykos. Until then, you can also check out our website, NycosRPG.com. At any rate, glad to have you with us for tonight. I hope to see you soon. This is Jonathan Alvin, Game Master's Toolbox. See you next time.